Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome on behalf of the Royal Society to our event today, part of our 2021 Summer Science. So if you'd like to get involved and speak to our researcher today, we're going to be taking questions on slido.com. So head to slido.com and use the event code WIL727. And here you can ask questions to our amazing speaker who's going to be taking part in today's session. You can also upvote the questions that you see and use these to really kind of ask any questions around the session that you might have today. So we'll also be trying to answer as many as possible over the course of the next sort of half an hour, but we might not be able to answer everything. You can also tweet and post about this event, so please use hashtag Summer Science, and we are at Royal Society. And we also have live captioning available today, so if you'd like to use this, please do have a look at the bottom of your YouTube bar. You can turn this on with the subtitles/closed captions option. So without further ado, I would like to welcome our fantastic speaker who's going to be speaking to us this afternoon, Dr. Jackie Chappell from the University of Birmingham. And Jackie is a Royal Society Industry Fellow and will be chatting us today about why it's important to bring the wild back to captive animals and how she's helping UK zoos to do this. So over to you, Jackie.
Thanks very much, Jamie. I'd like to take the opportunity first to thank the Royal Society for giving me this opportunity to speak today, and to all of you at home for taking the time to listen. That's great. So as Amy said, my name's Jackie Chappell, and my research really focuses on the ways that animals use their intelligence to adapt to their environments. And what I'm going to be talking about today is why captive animals need their wild behaviours. But in order to do that, I really need to first take a step backwards and think about why behaviour is important for wild animals at all. So the kinds of species that I work on tend to be long-lived species, and often those that live in quite complex and dynamic environments that are constantly changing. And these kind of environments really pose challenges for animals, which they use their behaviour often to overcome. So if we think about the example of this orangutan here, orangutans are quite heavy-bodied apes, and they move around, spend most of their time in the canopy of tropical forests. And this really poses problems when they come to cross from tree to tree and have to cross the gap between two canopies. Because of their large body size and a lot of the fact that a lot of the supports that are in the periphery of the canopy are very fine and very flexible, they can't necessarily hold the animal's body weight. And so orangutans have these unique locomotor behaviours, that's movement behaviours, that they use to cross gaps in the canopy. And you can see this female here is using multiple supports at the same time, some of them very fine and holding them together, and using that to, along with flexible supports, to move between trees safely. So this is quite a challenging kind of behaviour, and we can think of it as sort of a difference between us as humans walking on a pavement where, if it's flat and level and there's not any paving slabs sticking up, then every step is more or less the same, and you're just putting one foot in front of the other and repeating the action. So you don't really have to think very much about what you're doing and how you're moving. But if you've ever tried rock climbing, that's a completely different kettle of fish, and you have to think about where you put each hand and each foot, and you have to think about whether a hold can support you and whether you can reach the next hold that's coming and how you're going to move from one to the other. So it's very much more challenging, and that's the kind of behaviour that we're talking about here. So that's primates. What I'm mostly going to be talking about today is work I'm doing with parrots with Drayton Manor Zoo. And parrots are another group of species which are generally quite long-lived. Most species live a long time, and many of parrot species live in tropical forest as well. And so they have similar kinds of problems, particularly when they're foraging, because they feed on a really wide variety of different food types. And to find those, they have to move around within the canopy on these very fine, flexible supports. They're very acrobatic. They're always moving around, suspending themselves from a foot or a bill, and they're finding these different foods. So they have to know what tree to go to, where the fruits are ripening now, or the seeds are developing, and they have to know how to find those trees. Then they have to find the food within the trees, and then they have to process the food. And so you can see the parrot at the bottom here, so Quaker parrot, is using its bill and its foot and its tongue together to very delicately process the food that it's eating. And so behaviour involves lots of different systems. Many parrot species also eat very hard nuts, and they have to crack the shell of those nuts, and so they need very strong jaw muscles in order to do that. So behaviour is really a key part of what makes each species unique, and it affects lots of different systems. So while the environment shapes the animal's behaviour, the animal behaviour also influences development of muscles, of bone, and of the animal's intelligence as well. So it's really a key part of what makes each species unique. And the thing is that if captive environments can't provide this, because they have a different kind of physical environment than that the animal would be in the wild, then they're not really able to preserve the whole species and its adaptations. They're only preserving its genes. So it's a really important thing to try and get right. So if we think about why it might be difficult to replicate wild behaviours in captivity, quite a lot of that's to do with the physical environment and the foraging opportunities and so on. So if we think about the differences, there are some very obvious big differences between captive and wild environments. And the first one, of course, is size and complexity. So wild environments are enormous very often, and they're very complex, particularly tropical forest. They change very rapidly over time, so the animal's got to adapt to those kinds of changes. Whereas captive enclosures tend to be quite small, and they're definitely finite, and they are often structurally quite simple. And then we have safety and predictability. Wild environments are quite hazardous places to be very often. Animals are obviously having to avoid predators, having to avoid eating toxic foods or avoiding venomous snakes and so on. And so it's quite an unsafe and unpredictable environment. And for very obvious and very understandable reasons, zoos are very safe and predictable environments. Now, obviously, we don't want zoos to become unsafe because they're taking care of critically endangered species. So we don't want to make them any more critically endangered in zoos. So safety is obviously important, but perhaps we can make zoo environments a little bit less predictable, and that might help be a bit more challenging for animals. And finally, we have foraging opportunities. So foraging in the wild, many species feed on a very wide variety of different kinds of food. And so they have to find those foods, they have to then get hold of them, they have to process them. And that whole process of foraging can take up a substantial portion of an animal's day and its activity budget. Whereas in captivity, a lot of that work is done by the keepers, finding, obviously, buying the food, preparing it and providing it in a number of meals in the day. So foraging opportunities tend to be reduced and animals don't have to spend so long foraging for food in captivity. So the picture that's kind of building up is that zoos are safe but rather unchallenging environments. And so I think of it a bit like, I really enjoy nothing more than sitting on a sofa with a bowl of snacks, watching TV. And it's very enjoyable activity. It's not very challenging, and it's not really the kind of challenging, diverse behaviours that humans evolved to do, and the kind of behavioural plasticity that we evolved to show. So if I can challenge myself to get up off the sofa and do some exercise, which is often quite hard, and to challenge my brain a bit, then those kinds of activities are going to be better in the long run for my physical health and for my mental well-being than it would be if I did very safe and unchallenging activities. So that's the kind of thing that we're trying to do with zoos. And the key really is to try and make captive environments that replicate some of the challenges of the wild environments, rather than actually looking necessarily like wild environments. The second problem with trying to replicate captive behaviours in zoos is that in order to do this properly, zoos really need to know what the diversity of behaviours is that their animals are showing. And so they have to record behaviour, and behaviour happens and unfolds over long periods of time. So that's something that's time consuming to do. And then you need to analyse the data and figure out what the patterns are and how it relates to wild behaviours. And that's all quite complicated to do, and again, time consuming. And keepers are very busy people caring for the animals already. So part of my project with Drayton Manor Park Zoo is to try and develop processes which will make this easier for them so that they can more easily collect and monitor the behaviour of their species and use that to make evidence-based decisions about management and the way that the enclosure is designed. So Drayton Manor Park Zoo is a zoo within a theme park, and they're really committed to improving the welfare standards based on scientific evidence. And so they've ultimately really embraced the tool that we're developing together, and the animals are just starting to enjoy the benefits of that now. So what I'm going to do is take you through the monitoring process and what it involves, and then give you a little bit of an example from the work that I've already done on two particular species. I'm going to talk a bit about work that I've been doing with Moluccan cockatoos and umbrella cockatoos. And this work is sort of half completed at the moment. Everything got delayed by COVID, but I can show you some of the results. So the first part is that I developed a protocol so that people who have a minimal amount of training can collect information on movement of animals, of feeding and foraging behaviours, the way that they're exploring and using their enclosure, and also social behaviours, interactions between different individuals. So once they've done that, they can then upload that data for analysis and have it automatically compared with wild behaviour. So what you see on the right-hand side is a screenshot from an app that I've developed myself to enable the zoo to automatically upload the data that they've collected and have it analysed and graphically represented so that they can see what's going on with their animals and have key findings highlighted for them. What the app also does is, on the basis of these results, it recommends enclosure modifications. And again, these are modifications where we're trying to create enclosures that behave more like the wild environment structurally, rather than actually looking like the wild environment. So once they've done that, made the modifications, collect data again, and then again upload it, and it's automatically compared to both the baseline data and the wild type data. And then you can see whether the behavioural profile is now more similar to that of wild species than it was before. So that's kind of the workflow that you go through. Just to show you some of the results here, I was talking earlier about the way that parrots move through the canopy and how they have to kind of twist and turn and be quite acrobatic in order to find foods that are located within trees. And so to do that, they have to figure out how to move in this very complex tangle of branches, some of which are very bendy. And so they have to keep their balance and use their muscles and their skeleton and their brain to figure out how they're going to move through this to find the food. So one of the things that we built into the app was to look at the way that the animals are using supports within their enclosure as they're showing different types of locomotor or movement behaviour. So the graphs that you can see here show the percentage of observations in which the different individuals have used different types of support when they're doing different types of locomotor behaviours. So the two leftmost bars, we have perching and walking, fairly self-explanatory. Hanging is when they're very acrobatic, suspending from one or both feet and or their bill. They can do all of those independently. And climbing is climbing around using their feet and their bill to move around on supports. And I've organised the supports from the least challenging at the top to the most challenging at the bottom. So moving around on the ground or solid platforms, a bit like us walking on pavement, it's very easy to do. You put one foot in front of the other and off you go. Whereas moving on unstable supports, which move around as you get on them, so things like ropes, things like solid perches which are suspended, and plants within the enclosure, those are all much more challenging to move on. What you can see from the bars is that the two bars on the left in each of these graphs tend to have more colours than the others. And so what that's showing is that when they're perching and walking, they're showing a greater variety of different types of support use than they are when they're hanging and climbing. And in fact, when they're hanging and climbing, what they're mostly using is the wire mesh of the enclosure itself. And that's very kind of grid-like. It's very similar all over the enclosure. And so again, it's not very challenging to move on. So one of the things that we've put in place with the enclosure modifications, and this is just the start of it really, is to try and disrupt this movement around on the mesh so that we're making it more challenging in places for them to move. So what we've done is we've put bushy branches which are pinned to the mesh in the corners, in 3 of the corners of the enclosure, so that when they're moving around on the mesh, they have to go through this tangle of branches for at least some of the time in order to climb around. And so it's making things a bit more difficult for them. And we've also got ropes, which instead of being just attached to solid things in the enclosure, are wrapped around springy branches, so that when you have a cockatoo on one part of the rope and one on the other part of the rope, it's moving very unpredictably as they each move around. So it's something that they can't really ever quite get used to, and they have to figure out as they go. And again, that's much more difficult for them to move on. And we also have these suspended feeders that you can see in the top left-hand corner there. You can see that's very chewed. That's been in with some grey parrots for a while, and that we need to make it out of metal because wood does not last for very long. And so those, again, are a bit more difficult than static platforms for them to feed from. And we got a whole load of other ideas to tackle other issues like foraging time and so on. So this really just to give you a taster of what we're doing. So I hope I've shown you how by kind of challenging animals by making captive environments less predictable, we can stimulate some of these wild behaviours that they would show in the wild, and that in turn can help to stimulate the development of bones and muscles and their intelligence and even their social behaviour as it would when they were in the wild. And so hopefully what we're able to do is to preserve what makes each species unique, preserve these unique behavioural adaptations, and thereby also hopefully improve their physical health and their mental health, and also throughout this process enable zoos to monitor the behaviour of their animals and then therefore make evidence-based decisions on how they change the enclosure and other aspects of the way that the animals are managed to try and give the animals the opportunity to express these wild behaviours. So thank you very much for listening. It's been a pleasure to talk to you today. And I'd also just like to thank my colleagues in my research team. We've got lots of PhD students and postdocs who work on related projects, and also thank my co-supervisor for a lot of my work, which is Susanna Thorpe, who's up in that grid there, and our funders and partners who've helped us along the way. So thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jackie. That was an absolutely fascinating talk. And who knew there was so much that you needed to think about when designing animal enclosures? I definitely did not. So we've got questions thick and fast coming in on Slido, and we've definitely got time to pose a few for you now, Jackie. So I'm going to start with a question from Timothy, which is the top voted question. And that's and they are asking, are orangutans related to bears or monkeys?
They are somewhat related to monkeys, not to bears. Apes, which orangutans are primates, as are we, and we are also apes. So we're all somewhat related to monkeys, but bears are much more distantly related. They're still mammals, so we're all mammals, including monkeys and other primates, and also apes and humans, but we're much more distantly related to bears.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jackie. An excellent question, Timothy. So I'm going to go now to Liza, who is asking a question about the wild base behaviour. And what she'd like to know is, how do you work out what normal wild behaviour is so that you know what to work towards when you're designing or advising zoos about their enclosures?
That's a really good question. Yeah, it's really difficult. So what we work on the basis of is work that we've done ourselves. Now, this is mainly for apes, which is a part that I haven't had time to talk about today, but we do also work with primates. And so it's partly work we've done ourselves, partly work in the literature, so which other researchers have done and have written up. And so we can take that data and figure out how long animals spend doing particular kinds of behaviours, which kinds are really important for their everyday lives and the way that they live in their environments. And we use that to kind of build up a picture of the kinds of portfolio of behaviours, if you like, that we would expect to see in captive species. But it's very difficult. And in fact, for many species, particularly birds, there's not a huge amount of data out there on very basic just their broad behaviour, their what we call activity budgets. So how long they spend foraging, how long they spend resting, all of these sorts of things. It can be quite hard to find. And if we can't find it for a particular species that we're working on, we try to go to the most closely related species that we can, that we have data on, that also shares the same kind of ecology and the same kind of environment. And that's really the best we can do with the data that we've got. But I really would encourage anybody who's thinking about doing a PhD or something like that to go out and get more data on wild behaviours, because it's really important.
There we go, put that challenge out to everyone watching today. Brilliant. So I think this is a similar, kind of on a similar vein, a question from Sarah, who's asking, can a captive enclosure ever truly be big enough, compared especially obviously to their natural habitats? Will they always be too small?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's one that a lot of people worry about with zoos. What I would say is that there are ways of making an enclosure energetically more demanding without having to necessarily increase the size. And not just energetically demanding, but kind of in terms of the intelligence and how the animal is engaged with their environment and how they're having to solve problems. You can do that by making the enclosure more complex without necessarily having to make it larger. And so a good example that's not from either parrots or from primates is that many zoos now are using feeding poles for their big cats. So what they have is like a really large telegraph pole, and they put some meat at the top of the pole, and they use that to feed their big cats. Now, big cats in the wild, particularly species like tigers, they don't run up trees to catch their prey, they run along the ground. But what it's replicating is the energetic challenge that would normally pose to the animal, and the kind of burst of acceleration that they need when they're chasing down their prey and leaping on it. And that's kind of replicated in a smaller space of time by making the animal go vertical and getting it to go up a pole. And so this can be really effective and kind of behaviorally effective as well, because tigers often in these situations, they actually sort of stalk the pole. So they behave around it as if it's a real prey that they're approaching. If any of you have got cats at home, I've got two, then you've probably seen that kind of behavior if they're chasing a feather or something like that. So they stalk the pole and then rush up it to go and get the food. And so it's kind of replicating some of the behaviors as well as the energy that would be involved in making a real kill. And there is some evidence coming out that having these this pole feeding behaviours reduces the incidence of things like arthritis in captive tigers. So it does seem to have a physical effect on them too. So it's different for different species, but if you're imaginative, you can think of ways that you can challenge the animal both energetically and cognitively, so the way that they're using their intelligence to solve problems in their environment without necessarily having to make the enclosure much bigger. But it is a difficult balance, and it also depends on what the animal's being fed, because just like us, they can get obese if they eat too much and don't exercise enough. So it's trying to get that balance right between the two things, really.
Well, that's a really interesting answer, and obviously kind of zookeepers have their work cut out when we're looking at all of that, and yourself as well, who studies these behaviours. And I think this question actually is from Rachel, is kind of linked a little bit to what you've just said there, because she's asking whether public zoos can ever be truly ethical. And I think that's an interesting angle.
It is. Again, it's something. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, it is an interesting question. I know a lot of people feel unsure about zoos and a bit ambivalent about them. And what I would say is that I think they're really important for preserving species, for captive breeding programs. This is so critical because we have such an extinction crisis on at the moment, and we need as many ways of trying to save species as we can, hoping that we will also be able to sort out the environments that they can potentially go back into later on. Not those same individuals necessarily, but being able to reintroduce species back into the wild. That's obviously another key part of the problem. But while zoos are looking after animals, they're also able to to gather really important information about their biology, about any disease issues they have. And those are often really critical for conservationists in the wild to help them to care for animals there and to deal with issues that come up with health and so on. And it's an education setup as well, so that it's really important that people understand about different species, they understand what the conservation challenges are, because if you don't understand a species and you don't really engage with it, then why should you care about conserving that species in the wild? So I think zoos have lots of functions, and I think they can play a really important role in conservation, but and they have improved massively over the last sort of 10, 20 years, certainly. And they've really revolutionized things from the old kind of entertainment type zoos that were open sort of 50 years ago. But you have to also think about the welfare of the animals and how you can maximize that in the situations in which they're held. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer, and I think that's one that I think sadly we're going to have to draw to a close on. But I would just like to sneak in one very last question from Janet, who is asking what your favourite parrot is. So I don't know if you've got a short answer to that for Janet.
That's so hard. I love all parrots. Well, it'll have to be the most recent ones that I've worked with. So umbrella parrots are fascinating to watch. Their behaviours are just so amazing, and they're real characters. Each of the individuals are very different characters. So umbrella cockatoos, I would say, are one of my favourites. Yeah, thank you.
Brilliant. Fab. Well, I'm going to go and have a look at umbrella cockatoos as well, because it's something I've never heard of. So everyone, I'd encourage you all to check out umbrella cockatoos, and obviously all the work that Jackie does as well. So thank you, Jackie, so much for joining us today. It's been fascinating to talk to you. I'm really sad. I'm sorry for everyone's questions, because we've got a load of questions still that we haven't been able to ask Jackie today. But we really appreciate you speaking to us, Jackie, about your fascinating research, the important work that you're doing with zoos around the UK. And I'm going to have to draw this session to a close. So I'd just like to encourage all viewers watching us today, thank you so much for joining us. Do check out the rest of the Summer Science programme on our website, so royalsociety.org/summer. We've got a whole host of interactive content that you can go and explore, available online, loads of talks from across the last few days, all on demand on our YouTube channel as well. So please do check it out. And I think, have a good day, everyone. Enjoy the football if you're watching later. And Jackie, thank you so much for that amazing session. So yeah, great to chat with you.
Thank you. And thanks for listening, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.